Okay, and then we'll take questions. So let me get started. Let me just can you I'll share my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, just a second. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. So so let me jump right into it, right? So broadly speaking, if you see, we have two goals, right? One goal is how do you have predictable income for small holding farmers in India, right? And I want to call out this predictable bit because we usually always talk about how do we increase farmer incomes, how do we make it 2x, how do we make it 3x. Everybody talks about that. But in my opinion, based on what I've seen, getting predictability is much more important than just the pure increase part of it, because farming is kind of like, it's like gambling, right? I mean, most of the farmers that I've spoken to who have left farming, when I ask them how much money did you make this season, a large majority of them actually told me that no, this season was actually good. So why are you leaving farming when you are had a good season and you made money? What if I lose it next time, right? So farming is very much like gambling, especially when you go towards fresh produce, right? If you go to vegetables, it's completely like gambling. I mean, you might grow tomatoes which might sell for 20 bucks, or they might sell for 2 bucks, right? If they sell for 20 bucks, because of the sort of yield that you get from tomatoes, you'll make a lot of money, right? And if they get sold for 2 bucks, then even your cost of transport does not. So farming is very much like gambling. And I think one of the things that led us to think about farmism and other sort of models, one of the factors was always how do we make it predictable, right? Because only if we make it predictable, uh, will people kind of stick around in farming as well, right? The second aspect, of course, is which is related to this. The relation might not be obvious immediately, but access to safe and healthy food for consumers in India as well, right? That's the consumer side problem that we are trying to solve. Now, these are kind of related. The reason these are related is because uh, it's actually like a cycle, right? If you see, there are three stakeholders involved. The stakeholders involved in the food system, so to speak, are farmers, are consumers, us, and C is the planet, the environment, soil, water, etc. Right? So there are really three stakeholders. Unfortunately, right now, the way the system works is that it's it's broken for all the three parties. Why is it broken for us as consumers? Because uh, we get food which is very bad in terms of nutrition quality at this point of time, right? If you look at the content of vitamin C or vitamin A in oranges now versus, let's say, oranges from 30-40 years back, you would see that you would require almost, you would need to eat 8 or 9 oranges to get the same amount of vitamins in your body, right? So so essentially the nutrition quality of food has been going down drastically, and it's not about just about pesticides and all of that stuff. That's obviously the much more talked about thing. The bigger problem is that you're eating those salads, but those salads are actually not as nutritious as they were 30 years back, right? That's a bigger problem than just thinking about, oh, okay, there could be pesticides in my food and my kidney is working hard to get rid of it. But anyway, so essentially the food system is broken for consumers because you are getting food which is not really nutritious. uh, it's also broken for farmers as well, right? They have so many different problems to deal with. Now, here's what happens. Unfortunately, this food system being broken kind of starts from the consumer himself, because what happens, think of a day-to-day thing that you do, right? You go to the supermarket, you go and buy a brinjal, and that brinjal, while you're buying that brinjal, everybody, all of us does this. You would go and see this brinjal which is, it has a small hole in it, or it's looking a little crooked. You would not pick it, right? You would pick something which is nice and shiny. Now everybody does this, like almost 100%, right? When you do this, there's a signal that you send downstream to the farmers. The signal that you send to farmers is that it doesn't matter how nutritious the food is, because you are choosing that brinjal not because it's more nutritious than the neighboring brinjal. You are choosing it because it looks better. So the signal that you send to farmers is that what matters is how your food looks, not necessarily how it tastes, or how nutritious it is. Now, when you couple this with a farmer whose back is against the wall, he has very unpredictable incomes, etc., and you are telling him that your food must look good, what is going to do? He's obviously going to use lots of chemical fertilizers, lots of chemical pesticides. How does that hurt? That of course hurts the soil and the planet, even in the short run, right? Because for example, if you're using urea in your soil, um, almost 97 to 98% of the nitrogen in urea actually just flows away into the water. It does not even get into the plant, right? So it's all, finally it finds its way to the seas, right? If it finds its way to the seas, what happens? You have algal blooms that happen, right? Which end up killing your sea plankton, right? And sea planktons are a big source of removing carbon from the air. They are a big carbon sink, right? So so these things, it's an intricate web, right? It all finally it hurts us as well, right, as consumers. So let's just take a step back. Let's talk about the personas, right? While we were building Farmism, the personas, the key personas, right? First one, of course, is the urban Indian consumer. Let's call her Shweta, and she wants to make sure that what she is serving to her family is healthy and chemical free. Maybe she has a small kid, and she is probably a little worried about the food system. She has been seeing videos on YouTube, which where she has started getting worried about, are my vegetables being grown in sewage water? What are all these chemicals that people are talking about? Why did so many kids die last year in Karnataka, because when they were trying to eat a midday meal, a prasad from a temple, right? So she's basically a little worried about it. So she says, okay, let me try to grow vegetables on my own, right? Then there's Venkatesh, the Indian farmer, who's like, I wish I could make enough money from farming, and I wish farming was less like gambling, right? Now, how do these people right now talk to each other? This is how they talk to each other. This graphic, okay. But as you see that there are several layers between Venkatesh and Shweta right now, right, on an average 5 to 6, and so because of this creates a bunch of problems, right? The first problem that this creates is one of traceability, right? Shweta does not actually know that Venkatesh is growing his food at all. This creates a bunch of problems on its own. But essentially, the way at Farmizon, we said, let's rethink this system, right? Because this is not good for farmers. It's not good for consumers. Farmers don't know, consumers don't know where their food is coming from. They have no relationship with Venkatesh, and there are just so many intermediaries. So obviously, Venkatesh will make only 15-20% of the thing, right? Everybody will keep some amount of the value from the chain. So we said, let's bypass all of this. What is the simplest possible system we could think of? Simplest possible is, of course, Shweta and Venkatesh work together, and Venkatesh is growing food for Shweta, right? And maybe us as Farmizon will take care of anything which is not like Venkatesh's core competence, right? So Venkatesh takes care of land, labor, water, all of this stuff, right? And actually does all of the production. We take care of inputs, raw materials, seeds, saplings, organic fertilizers, pest control agents, and things like that. Tech, marketing, logistics, agronomy support, all of this we take care of. Consumers choose what to grow, and they get organically grown food home delivered with complete traceability. One way of thinking of this is, could be, it's almost, I mean, the parallel is like a Ola or Uber, right? Where uh, the car belongs to either the driver, or the driver has basically taken it from somebody, from an owner of the car, right? So the asset does not belong to the company, right? And that asset is being worked upon, and some realization is getting done from it, with the intermediate help from a platform like Farmizon, right? uh, One difference is we are like a Ola plus petrol, because we also provide the raw materials or the inputs, right? The commercial model that we started off with was that essentially consumers would pay 2,500 per month. We would divide up each farm into small 600 square feet patches of land, right? So 1 acre, approximately 41,000 sort of a square feet, right, would basically get divided up into about 60 of these plots, right? And you would need to keep aside walking space and things like that, right? So 60 plots, 600 square feet, 2,500 per month. We would take 50% of that, 1250, and farmers would get 1250 out of that. So if you do a very quick calculation, you would see that farmers would end up getting revenues of 70,000 per month, right, from this. which is very good because the farmers that we worked with, small holding, horticulture focused farmers, their profits were essentially somewhere around 7,000 rupees per month, right? Now, out of the 70,000, essentially their costs increased a little bit because this is more labor intensive than regular model of farming. So they end up still making about 35 to 40,000 profit per acre per month, right? So you are immediately talking about a 5x increase. But more importantly, it's predictable, right? Because consumers pay every month because they pay for inputs and not for outputs, right? So that's the other way that this is different. Like, see, essentially what uh, we are saying is that your family should have a farmer, just like your family has a doctor, right? Your family should have a farmer. Now, when you pay a doctor for the services that he provides you, you do not pay him saying, I'll pay you if my headache goes away, right? You pay him for putting in the effort, for his knowledge, for his expertise and his effort, right? So why should you pay a farmer not on his inputs, right? We questioned ourselves on that. And that's why the farmizan model essentially is based on inputs, not on outputs. What that means is you pay 2,500 per month, right? This basically goes into the rent of the land, taking care of it, all of the labor, effort, deliveries, all of those things. You might get every week your harvest could be 6 kg, 7 kg, or it could even be 20, 30 kgs, depending on how good that particular harvest was, right? And farming is very cyclical in nature as well. So the same patch of land would typically have productivity cycles, right? Now, so people started talking, referring to us as real life Farmville. That was not a name we gave ourselves, but essentially media started calling us as real life Farmville because that was a very easy conceptual way to understand this. Just like Farmville, you are clicking a few buttons and you are picking and choosing what crops to grow. The only difference is instead of getting virtual coins and a simulation running at the back end, this is actually real. All of those actions are taken by a farmer on the ground. And instead of virtual coins, you win actual produce, which gets delivered to you or which you can harvest yourself, right? So that's why it's called a real life farm, right? So the flow is very simple. Shweta signs up into the app, looks for a farm to subscribe. We show her farms which are near her, so she would not see all of the farms, only those which are near her. So if you sign up from Lucknow, you will not see any farms because we won't be able to deliver from here to Lucknow. Shweta looks at farm ratings, photos, Google Maps, reads about the soil test and water test report before choosing a farm. Uh, now reads the history of the farmer. For example, some consumers prefer to sign up for a farm which is managed by a very experienced farmer, whereas some consumers prefer to work with people who are uh, newly minted farmers because they can connect with them. For example, somebody who was basically working in IT and then took up early retirement and became a farmer himself. Some consumers prefer to subscribe to such farms as well. So they see farm ratings, etc., and they see availability as well, right? So sometimes farms have a waiting list and stuff like that, and when the waiting list gets over, we notify them, right? So Shweta finds a suitable farm for herself. She'll choose what to plant, and there's a starter plan that they can choose and get started because it gives them some initial configs to start with because they might not know, hey, should I plant 2 beds of tomato or would 1 bed be enough? Should I plant uh, radish now, or is it something that I should be planting when the temperature is slightly different, right? So they wouldn't know all of these things usually, so which is why that's there. Then there's the second piece, which is basically we wanted to build community around this as well, right? So again, if you look back at Farmville and other games, it becomes a lot more interesting when you're playing the game together with other people, not just by yourself trying to figure out stuff. That's boring, right? So the way we kind of started doing this was you have a chat group inside the app where you can interact with other growers in the community. In some cases, even the farmers respond in those chat groups and stuff like that, right? On the other side, the farmer also has an app. So one of the big challenges here, of course, was that if you're connecting farmers and consumers in a city like Bangalore, where we started with, uh, which is very cosmopolitan, how do you make sure that uh, you cross the communication barrier, right? Because a farmer here might understand only Telugu or Kannada, and you might have somebody from West Bengal, right, who can speak Bengali, Hindi, and English. How will these two people communicate? So the way we said was that we'll basically make, uh, you know, instead of having an unstructured communication between them, if you make it structured communication, which means that the consumer clicks a few buttons and certain instructions come up on a app for the farmer, then there's a easy way to kind of bridge this barrier, right? So the farmers also have a app which is basically the supply side app, right? So any two-sided marketplace, you have a consumer side demand side app and a supply side app. This is a supply side app. It's basically easily translatable into any local language and stuff like that, and they see some very simple uh, 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 simple instructions, right? And if you see, you will probably make sense out of this as well, right? Basically, if you see the third instruction on screen, second instruction is uh, first instruction is take a photo of the of plot A12, right? Then there's a green button, there's a red button, and there's a go ahead and water it plot A12. Then there's a put neem oil on bed number 2 in A12, which has carrots in it, right? And you see these green and red buttons. So once you press the green button, that's when essentially an update goes to the consumer, right? So several such tasks come up for the farmer, and as he does those, all those updates goes to the end consumer, right? So Shweta could then, let's say Shweta has started doing this. It's been 3 4 weeks, and now she actually wants to. She got an update on the app which said that your palak is ready for harvest, right? And you're growing. She was growing, let's say 12 13 different crops. One of them have started growing for harvest, right? So Shweta might want to first time she might want to come to the farm herself and harvest it herself. So she would basically go and schedule a visit through the app itself, right? And this helps build a relationship between Venkatesh and Shweta's family as well, right? Which is very important because that builds that trust. I mean, there's a very nice saying that one of our partner farmers says. What he says is that you know, if farmers knew who was their consumer, they would not poison their food, and if consumer knew who's growing their food, they would not bargain so much, right? So this I felt is, I mean, beautifully captures the benefit of actually consumers connecting farmers and consumers together. A lot of people do lip service around this, but to really build a relationship between farmers and consumers, it takes away a lot of the thorny issues, right? It takes away the thorny issue around, you know, a lot of times farmers get paid very less for all of the effort that they put in. It gets rid of the whole trust issue because there can be nothing more trustworthy than when you're talking to that person who's doing it for you, right? Yeah. Okay. Are you guys able to see everything? It's all going fine?
Yes, yes. It's perfectly audible and visible.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool. So now next weekend, for example, Shweta doesn't know how to. I mean, doesn't have time. She has a deadline, maybe an assignment submission on Monday, and so she can't go to the farm. So Farmizon goes ahead and delivers the produce to her. Right. What's very interesting is that we talk about farm to fork, but the Farmizon mini farm model is probably the shortest supply chain you can think of, because the way it happens is that 9 o'clock in the morning, our truck would go to the farm, right? Uh, the farmer already has harvest baskets, bags given by us. He goes ahead and packs it there, right? And the truck leaves directly from the farm to the consumer's house. It actually doesn't even go anywhere else, right? So you are essentially seeing a harvest to table cycle of like 6 7 hours maximum. In some cases, it might even be like 4 or 5 hours, which is pretty much unimaginable compared to any other sort of a supply chain in the fresh produce space that you might think of. The other ways, of course, you know, where you have hydroponic farms inside cities to grow stuff. Now, then a bunch of different things. Let me skip through this, but basically, you know, as beds get done, you see a lot of different instructions, recommendations, and you could choose to go with the recommendations that the system gives, or you can, you can go ahead and take all of the default options, or you can go and experiment and learn from mistakes, right? Go ahead and plant carrot in summer if you want to, in peak summer, when the carrots come out really small, really tiny, or fork out. I mean, one carrot becomes like a V-shaped carrot. Then maybe you decide, okay, there's a reason why carrots should be planted in winter. Maybe you make mistakes in crop rotation. So a bunch of different things, right? um, Now, there are other sort of things you could. So the system supports a bunch of different crop combinations and stuff, but we encourage you to go beyond that. So for example, flowers are not a standard thing that is supported by the system, but some consumers go ahead and do that, right? They do it just for the heck of it, and some of them do it because they want things like essential oils, etc. uh, there was also, I remember, one prospective consumer was asking me a lot of questions. What can we plant, what can we plant? And then I realized that his interest was really in figuring out whether he could grow cannabis in one of those. So I told him, see, everything is allowed, but it must be legal, right? So people think about a bunch of different sort of use cases. But anyway, the Farmizon platform, essentially, if you see, there are a bunch of different angles to it. There's the data part of it, because which is very exciting and interesting, because even if you have, let's say, just 1,000 customers, right? Those 1,000 customers have 12 beds. That's 12,000 beds in which each of them is growing a crop at a particular different life cycle, right? The seeds might have been planted on a different day. It might have got a pest attack, and so on and so forth. So it's almost like getting data from 12,000 farms. So this is a great way of actually capturing a lot of data, without having to, I mean, to get data from 12,000 farms would take a long time, right? But here with just 1,000 subscribers, you have very comparable data, right? Second is, of course, all of the technology infrastructure, which is not visible really, which is where you spend probably 50-60% of our engineering efforts in terms of crop planning, tracking, workflow, delivery optimization, inventory management, bunch of those sort of things. And then there's a community piece as well, right? Which is the farmer to consumer, consumer to consumer. And then there's a farmer to farmer thing also, because we see that there is a lot of learning which happens, between farmers. One of the questions that people asked us, or which were very hesitant initially, was, hey, how, this is a new way of doing things, how will we get farmers interested? So what we realized was that farming is an extremely social occupation compared to most other occupations, right? So if you're a software engineer, you probably don't talk about, you know uh, the bugs that you fixed, or the modules that you designed to your neighbors, right? But if you're a farmer, all your neighbors are really interested in what you are doing, what mistakes you are making, what new learning you've got, right? And when we launch initially in certain areas, we see all the local farmers coming and visiting that farm every day to see how things are going, is he making enough money, and all of that stuff. So from a go to market strategy with farmers, if you have something which really really works, it actually spreads very fast, much faster than the non farming world. So that's something to keep in mind, right? Now all of this I'm just going to skip, but a few things before I want to go to the main slide. So I haven't yet, this is all background information, right? So just want to point out a few interesting things about the model. So one is because, um, see, in this model, a farm is typically growing about 40 50 different type of crops at the same time. So this is extremely beneficial for soil quality, right? Because nature did not intend food to be grown with 10 acres of cabbage. That's not how nature intended food to be grown, because once that happens, the ecosystem goes out of whack, right? uh, One of the biggest examples of monocropping, which has destroyed the local ecosystem, is all the tea plantations that we have in India, right? They look beautiful when we go to hill stations, etc. They're like, oh man, these British, they have put these nice tea plantations, so amazing, so awesome. But those cause so much of devastation in the local biodiversity, it's unimaginable. The amount of biodiversity that it removed to create those single monocrop things is devastating. And natural farming, or farming without chemicals, which is what we follow, is something which relies on diversity. Without diversity, the systems are too fragile. Without diversity, if you get a pest attack, your crops are going to get destroyed, right? Which is why chemical farming, monocropping, industrial style farms, these all go together. Organic farming, multi-cropping, lot of biodiversity, developing the ecosystem inside the soil, these again is another method of farming, which is what we do, which ends up improving soil quality. Why should we care about soil quality? We should absolutely should care about soil quality, because soil is a great source of removing carbon from the atmosphere and trapping it. It's probably one of the uh, easiest ways to reverse as much of climate change as possible. It's debatable, people say that we are probably beyond the tipping point, but just growing a lot of trees, plants, and sequestering carbon back into the soil is a great way of trying to reverse at least the effects of climate change, right? Number one. Number two is, all the source of our nutrition is really soil, right? End of the day, the small amount of zinc that your body needs, the small amount of cobalt that your body needs, the little bit of molybdenum that your body needs, where does it come from? It's all coming from the soil, right? The carbon that your body needs, that's coming from, finally, the carbon and nitrogen, that's basically coming from the air, right? So all of these macronutrients you're getting from the air, so to speak, right? Because plants are doing photosynthesis, uh, or they are doing nitrogen fixation, which is basically creating nitrates in the soil, which then are getting absorbed by the plants, and then you are eating them, and that's making your amino acids, and that's making your proteins, right? So end of the day, the source of all our food is basically either the atmosphere or the soil. Soil, especially for micronutrients, right? For all of your vitamins and things like that. So obviously we should take care of soil. So this model is a great way to take care of soil and to shepherd soil. Second one is reduction in fertilizer use. Second one is reduction in fertilizer use. So when you reduce food miles, obviously the impact from a fossil fuel perspective and not using it is good. Thirdly, it avoids ugly produce wastage, right? So so if you have grown food in a garden somewhere, you will know that you never throw away any food, right? You might see that tomato which is not so good looking. It's like, अरे यार बहुत फाइट मार के उगाया है, खा लेते हैं, right? So you always eat of your own food, but that same person, when you go to the supermarket and buy, you will not buy a deformed tomato, right? And you will reject that. So worldwide, ugly food is almost 40%, that causes almost 30 to 40% produce wastage. There's a beautiful company which you guys should check out. It's called imperfectproduce.com. They actually took this insight and they created a company which is focused only on marketing imperfect produce or ugly produce, right? uh, I thought that that was a brilliant strategy, right, where they essentially took something which was broken in that supply chain and built a model using that to their advantage, right? So this avoids ugly produce wastage because you get all of your produce, you eat all of that, you don't throw anything away, right? It encourages consumption of local, seasonal, and healthy food. See, before doing Farmison, I had no idea of, what time of the year do carrots grow, what time of the year do cauliflowers grow, when should you have greens, when should you maybe avoid having greens. uh, 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 does capsicum even have a season? Does tomato grow all throughout the year? uh, Beans, does it grow all throughout the year? I used to think that all food goes all throughout the year because whenever I would go to a supermarket, the stores, the shelves are always full, right? You have carrots all throughout the year. But I think it's extremely beneficial to think about and know what is seasonal, because there is a grand design at play there, right? I mean, uh, when something grows in winter, there's a big likelihood that there are certain phytochemicals in it which, for example, warms up your body, right? So uh, so I think eating seasonal food is extremely important. Local, why is it important? For a bunch of different things, right? Of course, we have talked about food miles, we have talked about, I mean, we know about circular economies and things like that. But there is another reason for going after local as well. If you see, so local supply chains or short supply chains are one of the most resilient during COVID times, right? Which were the first things which came back up again? So the first things that started back again was your vegetable supply chain, because vegetables by nature are shorter supply chains, right? They are maybe coming from 100 kilometers away. At Farmison, there was just one day during the whole lockdown stage where we actually couldn't deliver, and we were still, even we would not have missed that one day also, we were actually out delivering because it was an essential service. But I mean, cops were essentially beating us up, which is why, we had to go to the commissioner and get a separate letter for him, so we wasted one day in that. But otherwise our supply chain did not get affected at all because it was so local, right? Anybody who's relying on stuff from across India would have got more would have been less resilient, right? So that's one reason why should actually one of the reasons why we should look at local supply chains, beyond of course the fact that it helps the local community and stuff like that. Then organic inputs ensure no groundwater pollution or toxic residues in food. It's a very family fun and learning for consumers. Children get introduced to farming. I mean, most children, when they come to the farm, they're like, okay, radish, I didn't know radish grows underground, right? Even many parents would come and they would be like, where is the ground? groundnut tree. I would be like, it's a groundnut, it will be under the ground. Oh, is it? I thought it grows in trees, right? So there is a lot of learning and fun that happens, which is kind of important, because end of the day, food is such a core important part of our lives, right? And kids, basically, a lot of kids think food grows in supermarket shelves, right, or in some factory somewhere. So I think it's very good and important to kind of teach kids about that, which is something that this model enables. Farmers get exposed to best practices of growing a number of different crops. Most of the farmers that we worked with, they had grown maybe 3 or 4 types of crops before. Okay, cabbage and cauliflower and carrots, right? Or I had done broccoli and something. Now suddenly they are growing zucchini, they are growing so many varieties of greens and so on and so forth. So it's really beneficial for them as well. Now this is actually the uh, core slide out of all of this, right? So from a service as well as a product design perspective, right, these were the challenges that we faced, and these are typically challenges that you would face in any sort of a two-sided marketplace, where especially if it's a new uh, model, right? So first one was around setting expectations. uh, let me talk a little bit more about that. So the system was built for a particular target audience, which was people who have kind of thought a little bit about their food, and then they decided to grow their own food, and they realize that they don't have the space, time, or the expertise to do it, and then they wanted to partner with a farmer to do it, right? This is who the farmers were hands on. They had What happened when we launched was that a lot of people from the remaining 95% segment joined in, who were basically like, hey, I want vegetables. I mean, okay, all of this is fine, but I'm signing up because I'm getting vegetables, right? Which was not what the system was built for. So I think in retrospect, if we had to do this again, the way we would do it is we would probably actually have restricted admission, right? So we would essentially onboard only those customers which fit in with our definition of whom we have built the service for, using some mechanisms. Right now it's free for all, people sign up and all of that stuff, but I think we would probably want to avoid that, because it's much better catering to a smaller set of users for whom you have built the service, rather than a very large set of users, but many of whom might have expectation mismatch from the service, right? So something to think about. Second is, of course, uh, this requires some level of consumer behavior modification as well. So if you see, and which is always a tricky thing whenever you are doing a startup, right? If it requires some level of consumer behavior modification, there's a problem. So uh, the consumer behavior modification in our case is as follows. When people buy vegetables, they their decision process is this. uh, I want to have, I feel like having, some tomato chutney tomorrow, and maybe I'll have some, palak paneer to go with it, and I'll make some rice, so I'll need some mixed vegetables, right? So you decide your vegetable buying based on what you want to eat. In this model, what happens, in the model that we follow for many farms, what happens is you make that choice 2 3 months before, because you do your planning, things start growing, all of your things to you will start getting your harvest from the 3rd or 4th week onwards, but all of your things to come into harvest will be a 3 month process, right? So you basically do a decision upfront as to what you're going to eat 3 months later. So that's a different sort of behavior. Secondly, in our model, what happens is you end up getting a lot of produce of certain types. So you might get a lot of bottle gourd, right? For the next 3 4 weeks, you're getting lots of harvests of bottle gourds, because those plants are in harvest, or your pumpkin is in harvest, right? You're getting these huge 10 kg pumpkins. The uh, and the plant is not gonna give you just one pumpkin just because you can eat one pumpkin, right? It's gonna give you like at least 10 or 12 pumpkins. So you suddenly have very big spikes in produce, right? So this requires you to again change your behavior to figure out, hey, hang on. So you have to look at it from the completely diametrically opposite way. Okay, I have this much food, what do I make out of it, right? So it's like a reverse recipe search that you have to do. Okay, I have this, what can I make out of it, rather than saying, oh, I'm going to buy this and this, right? So that is a big consumer behavior change. The way we try to enable it by is by, having things like recipes, etc., in the app, unconventional recipes, some things around other than food. What else can you use these vegetables for, right? Can you make a skincare thing at home? Can you make holy colors using your vegetables, right? So these sort of things, we would share a bunch of this sort of content in the app, because we realize that this behavior modification is needed to use our service, so we kind of made that blow a little softer. Third thing was in terms of, see, community is a very important part of what we are doing right here, because one of the things that we want to achieve through this is to educate farmers and educate consumers as well. Um, so now if a company tries to educate people, right, it's very costly. But if you build a community which is teaching each other, where somebody knows a little bit more about gardening, they are sharing all of that information, and things like that, then it builds a very nice, uh, trusted peer learning sort of a thing, right? So in this case, basically, how do you reward positive actions, right? So you have a, it's not just a two-sided marketplace, but there is also a, uh, there's also a community you are building around one of those sides, at least, right? So how do you reward positive actions there? Positive actions as in actions which are net positive for the community, not just net positive for that particular actor, right, or user. That's something that we spend a lot of time thinking about, and there are a bunch of different small things that we do, and we'll talk about those. We have things like leaderboards, etc., for various specific use cases, people who do certain things, right, their prizes and all of that stuff. Then third is how do you handle fourth is how do you handle service failures, right? And in our case, service failures can be very frequent and very common, because you are in farming, you're not running a factory, you are running a farm. So many things can go wrong, right, in a farm. uh, Even inside the farm, one part of the farm might be doing really well, another part of the farm might go for a toss, right? The onions are growing awesome in plot number A12, but in any plots in row number B, the onions are not growing, simply because maybe the slope of the land is different in that part of the farm, or maybe the soil is a little more clayey, right? Or maybe there is this underground rhizome, right, of a weed, which is basically, twisting itself around the roots in a particular area of the farm, right? Maybe there was rain during when, just when you had just put in the seeds, one day or 2 days after that there was rain and it washed away all of the stuff, right? Maybe there are uh, there are certain animals, there are rats, etc., which is coming and uprooting and destroying some of this stuff. So a lot of things can go wrong, and so essentially we have to design a service, set expectations based on the assumption that there would be service failures, right? um, so this is something that you have to always think of for a two-sided marketplace. For us, it's extremely complex, simply because it's a two-sided marketplace which has just way too many variables, right? Then the other piece is, in terms of, like, these are dilemmas that we face whenever we take any product design decisions. uh, is Farmizon going to be about driving engagement and about fun, or is it going to become an utility app, right? So we always are at a dilemma, right, between these two, because uh, different sets of users want different things. Some sets of users don't want to participate in conversations in the app. They don't want to go and do a collective buy or team buy or whatever. uh, they just want to get it done and be done with. But what we have seen is that, at least for the way it has evolved for us, is that people who treat us as an utility app, they usually don't have very high lifetime value for us. People who are very engaged, right, and who kind of, they become ambassadors for the app essentially, right? And they take away more than just buying vegetables, right? Because, see, we don't want to become another big basket. I mean, most people, for them, buying on big basket is an extremely boring chore, right? It's like, my mom has asked me to order groceries from big basket. I'll just do it, let me finish it, done, right? Ours is different. Our most valuable cohorts are people who essentially log in and use the app every day for several minutes, sometimes even hours, right? So we had this dilemma for a long time, but I think we have prioritized engagement over everything else. Then there's this whole thing around digital and physical gap. Okay, this is not relevant for many other things. It's relevant for us because ours is those our model is such that there is something which is going, you're seeing something in your app, and then there's something which is in the real uh, on the ground, right? So there is actually a patch of land on the ground where people are growing stuff and things like that. So the digital and physical gap, bridging it can become very costly, right? At various points of time. Just to give you a small example, right? So let's say like the consumer had a photo of the app where of their farm, and it was basically showing bed number 3 had weeds removed, right? He goes and visits the farm after 2 days, and then he sees, oh, hang on, there are weeds here. So what was that photo? Maybe that photo was wrong, maybe it was, but what people might not realize is that weeds grow very fast, right? And in 2 days it could be very different. So now the thing is, at what granularity do you have these updates? If you make it too granular, it's a lot of effort and a lot of work. If you don't make it granular, there is always a chance that it will be out of sync, right? What you see in your app versus what's going on the ground, and it could cause a trust issue, right? If a consumer actually goes and visits that. This is a big challenge that we always face. We have tried to solve it by having manual updates from the farmer, augmented with photos and videos from a drone that flies over the farm and things like that. So a bunch of these sort of things. Then the other thing, of course, is how do you handle bad participants in a two-sided marketplace, right? And especially two-sided marketplaces with a community, right? Because sometimes bad participants can spoil it for everybody else, right? It's like a reverse network effect, right? So to give you an example. So one of the things that our consumers can do is they can go ahead and they can come to the farm and self harvest on their own, right? Now, invariably, if there are 200 subscribers in a farm, we would see that there's this one person who would come to the farm. Everybody would be very nice. They would come to the farm and they would, just take 5 6 kgs, harvest it, be respectful when they talk to the farmer and go away. Then there'll be this one guy, who would basically who would come with 5 bags, you know and they would take like 10 kg 10 kg 10 kg 50 60 kg, सिर्फ अपना नहीं पूरा अपना मोहल्ला के लिए vegetables लेके जाएंगे, right? Self harvest करके. So we would have seen some of these sort of cases as well. So the how do you handle it in a product is important. Because we have a community, that's actually helped us handle these bad actors, because the way we do it is very simple. We first send them a uh, one-on-one message on their app, uh, giving a very generic please make sure that you are mindful of how much harvest you take for yourself, right? Please treat farmers with respect. So we send it only to them, but they think it's a generic message, so it does not create too much of conflict also, right? So you basically give the message to the customer, but you don't do have a conflict with him saying, sir, why did you do this? Sir, you have taken too much stuff. Then we monitor them. If it still doesn't, the behavior still does not change, then we would send them a we would basically send a generic message in the group, right? Saying we have observed that some people are doing, usually almost 90% of the cases, because there was a community chat group inside, sending a generic message inside the chat group immediately stopped these bad actors at play. But essentially, for any marketplaces which are scaling, they need to think of ways to stop bad actors or lemons to spoil the experience for others, right? It could even be on the farmer side, right? A farmer who's not doing a good job, right, spoils the reputation of farmism, right? And finally, that farmer might not have done a great job. Maybe he's not doing all of the tasks properly, etc. But for a consumer, all because they're using the farmism app, it's like, farmism doesn't work for me, right? It's not a good thing. So these are things that we obviously need to always keep on spending time figuring out. uh, then of course the farmer behavior modification bit, what we talked about, like farmers are used to doing things in a particular way, and if you just tell them that, hey, no, this is how you need to do it, it doesn't work that well. So what we did was we had a model farm. So we would tell farmers, please do it like this. Okay, you're not doing it. Hey, this weekend we are having a meeting at our model farm, please come in and we'll show you how this is done. So you influence them without directly challenging them, right? So these are some of the service design challenges, etc., that we faced. And I think I'll stop at that and take any particular questions that you may have.
Yes, thank you so much, Ami, for that talk. It was really interesting and gave an interesting perspective into community support agriculture. We do have some questions coming in. So, first is by Milan.
Yeah.
What are the challenges in onboarding farmers to Farmizon? In particular, the existing social system of farmers, in which intermediaries play an important role, such as lending.
Yeah. So I think, see, one of the things that we saw was that, see, farmers have lost a lot of trust and faith in the system, which is what is kind of in general the manifestation of some of that is coming up with all of these farmer protests and stuff like that, right? Things which are arguably good for them, they have a lot of hesitation around it, and things like that. Because there's a reason for that. It's not just because of what's happening with the current government. It's just that over the years, they have been made a lot of promises to. They have been promised a lot of different silver bullets. Hey, use this technology, this is going to solve it for you, this is going to take care of everything, and it has never really worked. They're still, like, their life is becoming worse and worse every year. So which is why adopting new technologies, etc., is something they're very, very hesitant to, right? They're like, somebody is just trying to exploit me or whatever. So the way to do it is essentially by making one farmer successful in a taluk or a district, right? And then letting that farmer, like, somehow figure out. See, farmers also become very proud, right, as well. They like, because see, they are professionals as well, and their professional success is how much yield they got out of it. They tried out something new and it worked, right? Just like for us, it's like, oh, I got promoted, I got this, I got that, my salary increased, right? So for a farmer, it's like, I tried something new and it worked and it got bumper yields, right? That's basically their thing. So you enable a farmer to do that. You have to be a little patient, right? So you have to give it the 3-4 months sort of a cycle for them to go through one particular crop cycle. And then you really use that particular farmer in that district and taluk, and you promote him, right? So you maybe shoot videos, you do a gathering, and you invite that particular farmer there. You sponsor the chai and the snacks and all of that stuff. So you'll have to use some of these techniques where you kind of get out of the way. The more you speak and try to convince people, it doesn't work. I mean, you have to enable farmers to speak, saying this solution is good for them.
Thank you for that answer. There's another question by Soumya. There were a lot of business being handled by Instagram page. At what point building a dedicated app for farmers and customers became a priority?
Yeah. So, good question. So I think, you should actually see, if you look at things like lean startups, etc., right? um, it's always better to get started with whatever you have, right? With a WhatsApp group, with just a Google Docs and things like that, right? Rather than spend 5-6 months building out stuff and then seeing whether it will work or not. It's always better to get things started quickly so that you can iterate. It might fail. You might realize that, there's going to be a lot of fights in the founding team. You might realize that this doesn't work in your part of the country. So always start off without building stuff as much as possible. Having said that, for us, we actually did not take that route. The reason we did not take that route was because we had run an experiment without using any technology or any commercial arrangement like that before, right? So we had a bunch of people. Where I stay, about 2-3 kilometers from there, there was a farmer whom I had contacted and said, hey, can you go ahead and just give me this small patch of land, go ahead and do it. Then I started getting in some of my friends and relatives to do that, and it was being done completely non-commercially, right? So we ran that for some time. We realized what are the challenges to scale of it, and we said, okay, let's create a playbook out of it. Let's create an app, let's create all of this stuff so that this can actually finally be commercialized as well. So it's always better to do things as much without building stuff, right, as possible.
Right. Rishabh has raised his hand. So, Rishabh, if you want to go ahead, you can unmute yourself and ask any question that you have.
Hello, sir. It's a pleasure to talk. I wanted to know what you will see the future of this business, because from my point of view, it's very unique, and it's a kind of where common people invest in some kind of a farming business, and they will get return. And as technology is getting very closer and closer in terms, so how you will see the future of this business?
Sure. So I think the particular thing that I discussed today, right, which was this whole mini farm stuff, this is one way of connecting farmers to consumers, right? The broader problem is how do you help farmers sell directly to consumers? We came up with one transaction mechanism, which is that you are essentially enabling contract farming at a retail scale, right? So a farmer and a consumer is entering into a contract, and the payment terms, etc., are all decided, and then somebody is taking care of that contract execution. So now this is always going to be a small percentage of the total addressable market, because it is complex, right? It requires behavior change and so on and so forth, right? So the way we have thought about this, I spoke about this because this is what we started off with, and this was the first phase of our business. But what we have evolved into is basically we have become a farm to fork marketplace, where this is one of the several mechanisms of transactions that we enable between farmers and consumers, right? So if you are somebody who's living in a city who really wants a patch of land in which he wants to experiment, then you sign up for a mini farm subscription. We have other type of subscriptions. You could subscribe to a box of fruit, for example, right, which does not work in this mode. You can't do this with fruit trees, because you plant a fruit tree, it'll take 7-9 years to give you some fruit from that, right? So we have several different models, out of which this is the model that we started off with, and we love talking about it because it's the most unique one, right? So I think in general, farm to fork as a business model where you have minimum hops between farmers and consumers, I think has a huge potential. I mean, if you see, it has been growing worldwide as well. But there is a problem. The problem is that the two big issues are around discovery and logistics, right? And discovery is getting solved nowadays with things like WhatsApp, Facebook groups, and all of that stuff. Logistics is still a problem, and logistics has two parts to it, right? One is first mile logistics, and second is last mile logistics. How do you get stuff from the farm to the city? And then last mile, how do you get it to individual consumers inside the city, right? So this logistics piece is the biggest challenge to any farm to fork business, so to speak, right? Which is why you will see many companies which start off, which do farm to fork, but which are then not able to scale, right? They basically get caught up in this whole the whole logistics things, and they are not able to figure out how to do that efficiently. So I think folks who are able to crack the logistics piece, either by scaling and thereby getting the costs down, right, or by maybe through technology or through some sort of a business model innovation, I think they will have a bright future. Just to give you an example of a business model innovation which can make logistics easier, uh, see, one of the big problems with vegetables and fruits is that your average order value is very small compared to, let's say if you're selling meat and chicken, right? Another different type of farm to fork. Uh, there, in a city like Bangalore, Mumbai, etc., your average ticket size would be maybe $900, right, for meat, fish, eggs, etc. This is the place that people like Licious or Fresh to Home play in, right? If you look at just vegetables, the average ticket size is actually very small. It's like $250. Okay, $250, $300 maximum. If you do fruits, it'll increase a little bit more. So now if you're doing $250, and if you see the last mile delivery, the average last mile delivery cost being 80 rupees out of that, right? Then that's a very big chunk of your GMV, which is just going in delivery cost, right? Like 250 में से आपका 80 rupees चला गया सिर्फ cost of last mile delivery mein, right? So this makes it unviable for a lot of fresh produce businesses. So there are some ways around this. One way around this is subscriptions, because once you do subscriptions, your cost of delivery goes down significantly, because you go on a milk route. Essentially, a milk route doesn't have to be only on a per day, everyday delivery like milk. It can be even once a week delivery, right? As long as you can optimize that route upfront, saying this is my weekly plan, kaise karunga delivery, then you can bring down that 80-90 rupees delivery cost to 40 rupees immediately, right? So subscriptions is one way of doing small average ticket volumes. But a second way of doing it is through one of the things that we support. The other things is called where you enable community buying, right? So let's say you are selling sapotas, right? And sapotas you are selling at 60 rupees per kg, right? If somebody buys 1 kg of sapotas, you will spend more money delivering it than how much the sapota costs. So one way to work around that is by basically incentivizing or changing business models or operational models, so that a lot of your deliveries are concentrated in an apartment complex, right? So if you do 50 deliveries in an apartment complex, then your cost per delivery is going to go down to 10 rupees, 12 rupees, and then suddenly the model becomes viable. So I think a lot of farm to fork businesses in cities are going to use some level of a operational model or business model innovation, or they will have a lot of money like Big Basket. Because see, that's the other thing, that okay, farm to fork bhi karenge, baki retail bhi karenge, right? So that the average ticket size comes to 1500 bucks, so that 80 rupees delivery charge is worth it, right? But that's not farm to fork. Then you become an online retailer, right? Doing only farm to fork has this challenge that the ticket sizes become very small, and how do you manage the delivery? But there are several innovations possible.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for that answer. We have another question from Soumya. From Ankit. Usually, farm produce is unpredictable, especially in open spaces. How does customers are compensated for any loss? Also, crops usually have a gestation period of 2 to 3 months, and then harvest happens in
Yeah,
a span of days. Doesn't it lead to higher supply than demand?
sure. Very good questions. So the first question what we have is, so whenever there is unpredictability, how do you manage it? One standard way to manage it is through insurance, right? So you basically pick up insurance. So in our way, how we did insurance is basically, uh, so we created a common area in each farm. Okay, we said that 10% of the farm, if it's a 40,000, if it's a 1 acre farm, we'll put 4,000 square feet as a common area. So your crops might fail, maybe some of your crops will fail, but then we'll make sure that there's enough stuff in the common area and we'll give you something, so you are not going to go hungry, right? So the common area serves as a floater insurance policy for the entire group, because everybody's crops won't fail. Because everybody's crops only fail when there's a big act of God sort of a thing. Like there was just way too much rain, there was complete flood, and the whole farm was under 1 feet of water, right? So those acts of God sort of a thing are already covered in our terms and conditions. It has never happened. But at an individual level, basically, they have access to this common area in every farm, which acts as a floater insurance policy. The second question is absolutely right. That's why I mentioned that there is a supply and demand gap in this. But I think one point that you might not have realized is that what happens is, so there is one thing when you're starting off a new mini farm. So first month, from your fourth week, maybe you have got your palak and your radish, right? Then after 1.5 to 2 months, you get some of your other vegetables coming in. Then third month, you get some of, now in third month, when you're third or fourth month, let's say when your tomatoes have started to come up, the beds which had palak in it have now got disappeared because you've harvested them, right? So there are a few techniques that needs to be done. One is you do staggered planting, right? Which means that in one bed you don't go ahead and plant 30 cauliflowers at the same time, because then you'll get 30 cauliflowers ready to harvest at the same time. So what you do is, that bed, customer might have instructed that when plant at a time, you plant 5 cauliflower saplings. Next week you plant 5 more. Next week you plant 5 more, so that you get a supply of cauliflowers for 5 to 6 weeks once it's ready for harvest. That's number one. Number two is, there is a difference in your what you get in your harvest, based on whether it's the first 3 months, which is really the ramp up phase, or whether it's in the steady stage phase. Because in steady state phase, what happens is, some things are already in harvest, and you are removing some has become empty, and you are putting in stuff there, right? So in steady state, when you are looking at a farm which has already been onboarded, and where the initial waiting period etc is done, then actually it works out pretty well. Because like you might have 6 or 7 crops which are in harvest, and you will plant some crops which are short term, which will start getting harvested next 2 3 weeks, and then some crops which are slightly longer term. And if you do better planning, you can actually do a better job. And this is, for example, this is one of the areas where theoretically we could use things like AI to help them do a better plan and to simulate that what would they get if, let's say, there's a crop failure, right? How, what sort of harvest will they get after 3 months, 6 months, 5 months, with a crop failure factor, for example. So we could do some of those sort of things as well.
Got it. There's another one from Soumya. Please explain a little bit more about the farmer side of the app and what design considerations were important for them in comparison to the consumer side of
So
that.
the first design consideration was, yeah. So the first design consideration was, of course, that you cannot. So one is, it obviously needed to be Android, right? Uh, since we work with a lot of peri-urban farmers, especially, we didn't face a situation where, oh, I don't have a smartphone. We actually, I mean, all these farmers actually had smartphones, right? Whomever, we never faced a saying, oh, I don't have a smartphone, I don't know what to do. Okay. So this is, I think, a situation which has changed, like which has become different in the last 2 3 years. If he had started this business 5 years back, maybe we would have faced that situation, right? Where, so that's number one. Number two is that remember, it's not just about knowing English or not. Many of the farmers are also not literate, right? Which means that even if it's written in Telugu, they will not be able to read Telugu, right? They know how to speak it, but they don't know how to read it. So, which is why we use a lot of symbols, etc. The idea is that if you just give those symbols, people should be able to figure out from that. Second is, there's a button in the Farmizon app where they can essentially, if they are not able to understand something, they can just quickly do a call with our support team and they'll tell them what's there, right? What we have seen though is, and this is the, I think, the interesting thing, I think we had a lot of concerns around, oh, is this farmer app, will it take a lot of training to train them, this, that? Not really. So the whole Indian jugaad thing kind of comes at if you give people tools, right? And if it is like, you can see, oh, there is some button here, people will try different things and they figure out things very quickly, right? I mean, WhatsApp, for example, is used in rural India most often as people don't tap in messages and type in messages. One is they share videos, of course, right? But secondly is they do a lot of recording. So they just record a voice. Uh, Not literate WhatsApp user uses it for voice, right? Where they'll be in a WhatsApp group and they'll just record something in voice and send it across, right? So I think the way people use it is also, so we should not overthink it. I think we overthought it a little bit. We said, no, all these big symbols should be there. You should not have to read things. It does not need to be very aesthetic, etc. It needs to be extremely super functional, right? But it's probably not that important. I think they will figure out. uh, that's what we saw.
Got it. Makes sense. There's last question from Neelab. Do you think organic market in India is big enough for businesses and investors? And how do you see the market evolving?
Yeah. So I think like any market which is attractive, especially for new entrants, most investors don't believe it is big enough. Okay. So that's always the case, because if everybody believes it's a big enough thing, there will be too much money going after it, right? And it's going to be a only capital game, right? You will not be able to, I mean, whoever has the most capital will win. That's what happens when. But right now the market is in a stage where there are several disbelievers in the market also, and that's usually the best time to build a business, when there are a lot of disbelievers as well, right? Because if everybody is a believer, then it's going to become a commodity business, or it's going to be a capital wala game only. So that's one thing. Second thing is, if you look at from a just from parallels, there are not too many numbers in India per se. We know that the growth rate is fast, but in terms of numbers, they're not very reliable numbers. But if you look at, for inspiration, if you look at the United States, you have seen how it has grown there, right, significantly. And the most heartening thing is that millennials have actually played a very big role in adoption of organic, right? So I think that's gonna so millennials all across the world are same, right? The things that a millennial in Los Angeles likes is the things that a millennial in Bangalore also likes, right? So so I think whatever we have seen in the US is what we'll see here. but you have to look at it also from a like you have to slice and dice the organic space as well. So organic cosmetics, for example, is growing much faster than organic food, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if some data comes out very soon that organic cosmetics is actually a much bigger market than organic produce as well. So you have to kind of segment it out as well when you are talking about growth rates, etc., as to which market are you really talking about, because organic food and organic cosmetics are two very separate markets.
Right. So that if there are any more questions, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask. And okay, if they're not, then that brings us to the end of this talk. Thank you so much, Shamik, for that interesting and enlightening talk on community support agriculture and how the whole doctor and farmer analogy points towards ensuring predictability in incomes to the farmers, and how a tech solution such as Farmazan can enable this farmer to consumer model to come to scale. And we could also see a lot of product management principles in action, setting product objective, that utility versus engagement point that you had made, nudging consumer behavior change, and incorporating gamification in the app and handling challenges. We definitely have a lot to take away from this talk and rethink about food and farmer relationship. So thanks a lot, and yeah, hope everyone enjoyed, and thanks everyone for joining in. Thanks a lot, Shamik.
Okay, thanks. Bye bye. I'll just drop in my email. You can
Yes,
get in touch with me at shamik@farmazon.com. Take care.
yeah.
Bye bye.
Thank you.